There's a Dutch company unlike anything the world has ever seen. It's more than 400 years old, and its value, adjusted for today's world, would overshadow Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Saudi Aramco combined. When we talk about capitalism or old money, our minds jump to names like the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers. But rarely do we think of a quiet, ancient Dutch enterprise that reshaped finance, economics, and global power forever. This is the story of a company that created the world's first corporation, the first stock exchange, and the first IPO, and somehow still echoes in the modern world. This is the strange tale of the Dutch East India Company and the House of Orange. To understand this, we have to go back to 1580, when something seismic shook the Iberian Peninsula. Spain absorbed Portugal into a personal union, merging two global titans under a single crown. Overnight, one monarchy ruled vast networks of land stretching across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. For the Dutch, this wasn't news, it was a death sentence. Still technically under Spanish control, and fighting bitterly for independence, the Dutch suddenly faced a giant with twice the reach and twice the naval power. Guns alone wouldn't save them. So they did something radical. They built a new kind of weapon. Private capital. In 1602, 7 Dutch trading companies unified to form a single juggernaut. Its name was impossibly long in Dutch, so we simply know it today as the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. The name came from their trading focus in the East Indies, what we know now as Indonesia, Malaysia, and the surrounding region. On the surface, the VOC looked like a trading outfit, ships carrying spices and fabrics across continents. Under the surface, it was a weaponized economic machine. It had its own armed fleets, private armies, forts scattered across Asia, and a corporate authority unlike anything before it. But its most revolutionary invention wasn't its navy or its cargo. It was its shares. For the first time in human history, regular citizens could invest in imperial expansion. Instead of kings raising taxes, a company could raise money from the public and scale without limits. Wealth no longer came from land or noble blood. It could be created through markets, manufactured, multiplied, and distributed through paper ownership. Merchants ran the operation, but behind the scenes, another power watched closely, the House of Orange. The House of Orange wasn't a kingdom. It was a dynasty trapped in the cracks of a changing world. Their noble titles meant little in a republic run by merchants. They had no mines, no land-based wealth, no divine right to secure their authority. Amsterdam elites wanted more republican control, Spain wanted the House of Orange crushed, and the dynasty itself seemed to be fading into irrelevance. But instead of dying out, it adapted. The House of Orange embraced the one force that was rewriting the world: capital. They didn't control the VOC, but they helped bankroll it, threw their influence behind it, and intertwined their future with its ascent. And in a republic where bloodline meant little, capital meant everything. Generations later, the relationship became official. Two descendants of the House of Orange, William IV and William V, became high-ranking leaders within the VOC and its counterpart, the West India Company. These stadtholders, a kind of state-appointed executive, effectively became some of the most powerful men in Europe. The VOC expanded east while the House of Orange rose into something greater than nobility. They still wore no crowns, but their power was undeniable. Dividends carried their influence. Commerce turned into sovereignty. The VOC moved not like a business, but like an empire. And at its peak, the VOC was valued at over $7.9 trillion in today's terms, more than double the world's most valuable company today. During its golden age, from the early 1600s to the mid-1700s, more than 1 million people sailed from the Netherlands to Asia under its flag. They weren't adventurers, they were employees of the world's first multinational corporation. Soldiers, sailors, clerks, craftsmen, administrators, they built ports across Ceylon, Java, Bengal, and beyond. They negotiated treaties, enforced trade rules, and imposed Dutch influence far from home. The VOC was powered by a human machine of massive scale, a workforce scattered across continents serving a company that looked more like a state. This empire stood on three pillars: a powerful state charter, Amsterdam's financial ecosystem, and the subtle but strategic support of the House of Orange. The VOC charter wasn't a license. It was sovereignty on paper. It gave the company full control over Dutch trade in Asia and allowed it to sign treaties, wage war, build colonies, govern territory, and maintain armies. Every decision made in its boardroom carried the weight of a national flag. With nearly 150 ships, tens of thousands of employees, and private soldiers at its command, the VOC moved boldly across the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and into Japan. Its greatest foothold emerged in the East Indies. In 1610, the VOC was allowed to build a trading post near the Siliwang River. By 1619, it seized the city of Jakarta and renamed it Batavia. This wasn't just renaming, it was a reordering of Asia. Batavia became the central hub of the VOC world, a Dutch capital planted in Indonesian soil. From there, Dutch governors ruled for nearly 3 centuries, shaping the region in ways still visible today, in cuisine, architecture, language, and cultural footprints. But constructing an empire isn't cheap. The VOC needed more than ambition, it needed capital. And that's when they reinvented how money worked. In August 1602, the VOC launched the world's first initial public offering. Ordinary people could buy shares and stay invested long-term. Capital poured in. Amsterdam's elites, who discreetly shaped political life, funneled money into the company through a new financial ecosystem, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's first. This exchange introduced new ideas that still define financial markets. For the first time, shares were permanent and transferable. People could trade ownership freely, creating a secondary market. Soon, traders began speculating, betting, arbitraging, using early versions of futures and hedging strategies that Wall Street still uses. VOC shares skyrocketed from an index of 100 in 1602 to more than 1,000 by the early 1700s. FOMO wasn't invented in the crypto era, it started here. But with investing came risk. What if ships sank? What if trade routes collapsed? The Dutch solved this with one legal invention that still protects entrepreneurs today: limited liability. Investors could only lose the money they invested. Their homes, their possessions, their lives were protected. This new safety net encouraged thousands to invest and suddenly created a new class of wealthy citizens whose power came from markets, not birthright. Dutch financial influence didn't stop at the Netherlands. It moved to Britain and eventually to America. At the center of this transfer was one man, William of Orange. Born into the same dynasty tied to the VOC, William married Mary Stuart, daughter of England's King James II. When England plunged into crisis, Parliament invited William to intervene. He sailed across the North Sea in 1688 in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary became joint monarchs, and with them came Dutch financial thinking. Under William's rule, England founded the Bank of England, created public credit, issued government bonds, and began financing wars through capital markets, ideas lifted directly from Dutch models. Meanwhile, decades earlier, Dutch ships had already reached the New World. The VOC and the West India Company established New Amsterdam at the tip of Manhattan in 1624. It was designed not as a colony of farmers, but as a commercial hub. Its grid-like structure, trade focus, and legal systems reflected Amsterdam more than England. When the British took over in 1664 and renamed it New York, they kept the Dutch financial backbone intact. Those habits endured, merging with British practices and eventually forming the foundations of American finance. Amsterdam and London soon developed a synchronized financial ecosystem. Amsterdam specialized in banking and stability. London innovated in trading and speculation. Together, they formed the backbone of global capitalism, and New York, connected through colonial history, absorbed both. Over time, that blend evolved into the world's financial capital. Dutch influence seeped into stock markets, company charters, financial laws, and banking norms. Long after the VOC faded, its architecture of power lived on. But every giant eventually crumbles. By the late 1700s, the VOC was collapsing under corruption, mismanagement, rising military costs, and fierce competition from Britain and France. Its once mighty structure hollowed out. Decision-making slowed. Officials enriched themselves. Markets changed. Rivals adapted. The company couldn't. By 1796, the Dutch government stepped in and nationalized what remained. The VOC died, but its blueprint became the skeleton of modern capitalism. Today, the Netherlands is no longer a maritime empire, but its financial influence is staggering. It ranks among the world's most competitive economies, with trillions in foreign investments flowing in and out. Dutch companies hold enormous stakes around the world, and behind much of this network sits a familiar name, the House of Orange. They still reign today, and while their monarchy is symbolic, their economic influence is not. They hold quiet stakes in companies like Shell through trusts and investment vehicles. They play a role in defense, energy, and corporate governance. In 1907, Royal Dutch merged with Shell Transport to form Royal Dutch Shell, another titan of global power. Dutch corporations like ING carry on this legacy, operating on blueprints built centuries earlier. But it's essential to remember that VOC's legacy isn't only financial brilliance, it's also brutality. Their empire was built with violence. The Banda Islands massacre nearly wiped out the native population. The Ambon massacre saw English and Japanese traders executed. The Batavia massacre in 1740 killed thousands of Chinese civilians in Jakarta. Forced labor systems exploited indigenous populations. Local political structures were crushed. Violence ensured profit. Control required suffering. The VOC's wealth came at the cost of countless lives. And yet, its financial architecture survived. The House of Orange understood early that power and capital would always be inseparable. They built a system where markets could substitute for monarchs, where corporations could act like states, and where capital, rather than crowns, determined influence. Today, the Netherlands no longer rules the seas, but Dutch capital moves across borders more effectively than any fleet ever could. So we are left with a question that matters even more in our world. If markets now hold the power once reserved for monarchs, then who governs the markets? Who wears the crown when the crown is invisible? If you've made it this far, leave an orange emoji in the comments. And if you enjoy these deep dive documentaries, please consider subscribing. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.